Hello everyone and welcome back to Quality Gaming. Today we're going to take a look at Hand of Fate 2. This game that puts together many different genres, including a collectible card game, action game, and a mix between a dungeon master and a player in Dungeons & Dragons with roguelite features. Whether the mix of these features works well is the question we will try to answer today. Hand of Fate is available on Steam for €27.99 or your regional equivalent. Hand of Fate certainly has a very interesting concept behind it. I really don't know who came up with it, but he certainly deserved his Christmas bonuses, as the first installment sold about 700,000 copies according to Steam Spy. So it's no real surprise that we got a follow-up. I need to say that I haven't played the first one, but I do remember seeing Total Biscuits reviewing the first one when it came out. And because I haven't played the first one, I will take a look at Hand of Fate 2 through a pair of completely fresh eyes. No comparisons to the first one, just a pure review of how well the game stands on its own feet. And as usually, we will start the review with a look at the game's mechanics, and well, since the game is combining so many different genres into one single experience, there is a good number of mechanics to talk about. And we will start with a part of the game I would describe as single-player Dungeons & Dragons. This statement itself sounds just weird. Single-player Dungeons & Dragons, how does that even work? The very base of D&D is social play, having the Dungeon Master come up with a story and you making decisions that hopefully benefit you the most. The way Hand of Fate makes this happen is through cards. The cards you gather as you explore more of the game serves as scenes for the action and story parts of the game. They also serve as equipment and characters. The cards are essentially the D&D rulebook for Hand of Fate, saying what encounter will have which feature. The thing I like the most about this concept is the fact that you're both the adventurer in the scenario, but also the Dungeon Master to a degree. So there are 22 separate campaigns, each with its own story and special encounters. But you also get to add a good chunk of encounters of your own choosing. You do this by when you're starting a new campaign, you choose cards that you gathered in your previous campaigns, and you can either choose to add cards making the campaign easier for you. So let's say for example you could add a card that would put in a friendly innkeeper to the deck, and that would give you some options to buy food and healing potions when you get to him. Or you could add an encounter card, potentially making the game harder for you because, you added like more foes to defeat, but also giving you the chance to get some of that sweet loot. The amount of cards is almost ridiculous, giving you plenty of options on how exactly you want to handle each campaign, and the amount of cards only grows with each campaign, as completing one adds about 10-15 cards to your choices. Another way to gain more cards is by completing certain encounters that have that little token on them. These usually provide less cards, but on the other hand, their rewards are often significantly better. Also, of course, not all cards are encounters. Some of them might be equipment that you can find through your journeys, or even specific kinds of equipment you can use straight off the bat when you start a new campaign. The last thing that should be mentioned when it comes to the cards is the fact that there are 3 types of them. Common cards, which are obviously common and don't really provide anything special. Secondly, there are platinum cards, which you can recognize because of their silver glow and are cards that provide only benefits to you. For example, my favorite platinum card is the Elder's Gift, which provides you with a piece of platinum equipment. The third and last type of cards are Brimstone, which are pretty much the opposite of platinum cards. Where platinum cards provide only benefits, Brimstone cards only have negative effects, but come with great rewards. And I already mentioned this before, but some of the cards have a token associated with them, and if you manage to beat a challenge associated with them, you get more cards towards your collection. Obviously, you won't get to choose at which order you will get these cards when in a campaign, as you're essentially drawing them from a deck and then they get placed randomly to the roll. But that only makes the game actually feel more like Dungeons & Dragons, because the DM would never just make a clear path for you where everything lines up perfectly. Apart from the actual drawing of the cards from your deck, creating a map from them for you to explore and giving things like loot and events that happen to you, like how much damage you take from a random thing, there is a lot more RNG in the game. For one thing, often you will be faced with actual dice rolling, where your aim is to beat a certain number to be successful. In these, you will always be presented with an option to re-roll the die, well, unless you strap roll enough, or even, if you're using the right companion, will be presented with the choice to add an additional die. Then, there are the random failure success cards, where you will be presented with 4 choices and you need to pick one, and hopefully, it will be a success card. And here I gotta say, I don't mind a certain amount of RNG in my games, but in Hand of Fate, the amount seems to be almost ridiculous at times. Like, it feels like every second encounter is purely RNG based. I don't mind the dice encounters that much, as you have an option to reroll, but the cards, those I wish would have some sort of skill test added to them. What would I personally like to see is if the random cards would be turned into a game of 3 shells. You know, where there's a ball hidden under one of the 3 cups, and then the speed could be even faster where the encounter is supposed to be harder. Even like to ridiculous degrees, but it will still be a test of skill and not just blind luck. Talking of skill-based tests, there actually are 2 in Hand of Fate. One is a spinning wheel where you have to stop on a success card. Just look out, you might be expecting that it will stop exactly at the spot when you push the button, but it continues to spin a little while longer. The second skill test is the pendulum, where you just select when the pendulum stops, and this time it actually stops right away. Okay, I think we have sufficiently talked about the mechanics in Hand of Fate that happen outside the combat phase. And the combat phase of the game is the last thing we will discuss in terms of mechanics in this review. Combat in Hand of Fate is sadly probably its weakest part. While it certainly isn't bad, it is also incredibly simplistic. You will find yourself using a grand total of 8 abilities over and over again. So let's talk about them. First, pretty obviously, is your attack. And what kind of attack you will use is solely based on the type of a weapon you're using. Things like dual-wielded daggers attack quickly and are best for quick enemies. One-handed weapons are somewhere in the middle but allow you to use a shield to boost your defenses. And heavy two-handed weapons are there for those who enjoy pure power over everything else. Secondly, there is a bash attack, used to break armor on enemies that have it. Attacking then builds up your combo meter, which allows you to use the third abilities at your disposal, your special attack. These are based off specific weapons you're using and vary quite nicely from just a stronger single strike attack up to an AoE effect that can stun multiple foes around you. But beware, if you get hit, your combo meter resets and you need to start building up from scratch. The way to prevent being hit is by using your defense ability, which just needs to be timed correctly, sort of like in bad Arkham games, but in a much more simple way. Whenever you see a green icon appear, just push the button. The second way to avoid damage, this time the type that is being shown by a red icon, is by dodging. And pretty much it's the same thing as dodging any other game, but usually get a bit more time to avoid the damage than when the green icon is shown. Some enemies also require that you use your finisher ability to actually kill them, otherwise they just stand there, regenerate health, and will eventually join back into the fight. But the principle for this is the same. Whenever an F icon is above them, just use the ability to kill. If you manage to get your hands on one of the artifacts, you will also get the ability to use. These are powerful attacks with quite varying effects, ranging from straight up dealing damage to things like mind control for a set duration of time. But what you need to keep in mind is that these artifacts have a limited number of uses. The last ability you get to use is associated with your companion. Each of them has a unique ability, usually on a cooldown. For example, the first companion has a great ability that grants you a magical shield that protects you from taking damage one time. That's it for the abilities, and as you can see, there really isn't a great deal of them, and all of them boil down to pushing a button at the correct time. I'm not saying that's inherently wrong, but I do wish there would be a bit more to them, something a bit more complex. Luckily, the thing that prevents the combat from becoming overly repetitive are the enemies. There is a good variability to them, and except for the very basic ones, they do come with pretty interesting attacks. These will range from bombs being thrown at you, enemies disappearing and appearing out in blue, or even charging attacks. And then there are the bosses. Each campaign and certain encounters provide you with a boss. They always have high health, sometimes even a bit of armor on top of that, and do have special abilities that are often unblockable and need to be interrupted by dealing damage to the boss. Sadly, the last thing we need to talk about in terms of combat is the thing that makes it the least fun part of Hand of Fate 2, the camera. For reasons I don't quite understand, each combat encounter has a fixed camera. Because of that, fighting enemies can get quite confusing, especially in encounters where you don't start at the bottom or whenever you have to protect someone. Seriously, just make the camera face the same way your character is facing. So, when it comes down to the mechanics and the general feel when playing Hand of Fate 2, it really boils down to two very different conclusions. The part of the game when you're building your deck, exploring the map, and just generally playing a single player version of D&D is awesome. It really is. The only complaint I would have probably goes towards the part of the game that there is a bit too much RNG here for my personal taste. But often there are ways to work around that, and some people might even like that amount of RNG. On the other hand, the combat is sort of meh. Not bad by any means, but also not great. A few more activatable abilities, especially some that would gather through cards and would be on a long cooldown, would help a ton. And the choice behind making the camera static is just plain weird. You will get used to it as you play for sure, but a different setup for the camera would fit the game much better. In the end, whether you will enjoy the gameplay of Hand of Fate 2 really depends on how much time you plan spending on combat and how much time you plan to spend on the rest. If you don't need the most complex systems in combat to have fun, then you will surely get fun out of Hand of Fate. And one last thing should be added here. Apart from the campaigns currently in game, there is an endless mode in the plans, and while I wasn't able to find a set date for it to be added to the game, it is surely coming. So, that's enough for the gameplay, and it's time to talk about the graphics of Hand of Fate 2. And again, I think they need to be separated into two distinct sections. First, there's the combat section, and second is the rest of the game. So, the combat sections honestly aren't that great. The graphics do look a few years old, with low resolution textures, effects that won't most likely impress you in any way, and the animations are pretty repetitive. On the other hand, the design of the enemies, weapons, and the environments are very nice and fit the tone of the game very well. Luckily, because the fact the combat isn't that great looking, there's the rest of the game. Here, the devs obviously had more time and probably even more experience to make it look great, as the rest of the game is largely pre-rendered, including the dealer, dice, and everything else. But what is seriously the most beautiful in Hand of Fate 2 are the cards. Seriously, the art on them is gorgeous. It makes me wish Hand of Fate was an actual board game. The second tool Hand of Fate 2 uses to create atmosphere apart from the graphics is the music. And it's standard. You know, just your regular fantasy music. It's certainly not bad, but it doesn't really stand out either. Then there are the sound effects, which actually do stand out quite nicely. The sounds of the monsters, weapons, and even the abilities are very nicely done. And lastly, there's the narration by the dealer. To be honest, it's probably the single best feature of Hand of Fate 2 just because of how well it is done. Before we bring the review to a conclusion, let's take a quick look at the game's performance. Straight off the bat, it ran well. But that's not really that surprising considering how dated combat the graphics look and the rest is pretty much pre-rendered. To be honest, Hand of Fate 2 could probably run on many phones and tablets these days, and to be even more honest, I would love to see a release for phones in the future as well. Also, I haven't encountered any bugs or crashes during my playing time, but there was one weird behavior of the game which could be potentially abused. I had to leave in a hurry one time, so I alt F4 from the game, and when I came back to play a bit more, all the encounters on the map were reset, as if I never did them. So if you ever just get unlucky or just are bad, this might be an easy way to get a second chance on the encounter. So, in conclusion, Hand of Fate 2 is a really fun game. The fact that it manages to mix all these different genres into one single game and that the game actually works is a testament to the developer's skill in terms of game design. The game certainly has its flaws. The combat is pretty repetitive, there's a bit too much RNG for my tastes, and if you're a graphic whore, you will most likely be disappointed with Hand of Fate 2. But if you can get over these things, a great game with many hours of fun is waiting there for you. The price tag isn't really the lowest, but I do think it is well worth your money. So if you think you might have fun with Hand of Fate 2, I will definitely recommend it. So that's it for today, guys. Hope you liked the video, and if you did, please consider liking it and subscribing to my channel. And comment if you have something you would like to add. See you guys later with more gaming content.